Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video from our channel. In today's video, we'll be highlighting American celebrities who have passed away in the last few days, along with other notable figures from around the world. Before we begin, we kindly ask you to show your support by giving this video a like. It really helps us out and means a lot. Thank you so much.
1. D'Angelo, R&B singer. His 1995 debut album, Brown Sugar, was a massive hit, spending 65 weeks on the Billboard 200 and going platinum within a year, earning him 4 Grammy nominations and helping launch the neo-soul movement. His second album, Voodoo, dropped in 2000, debuting at #1 with the iconic single, untitled, How Does It Feel? He returned with Black Messiah in 2014, which debuted at #5. He collaborated with Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill, and Angie Stone, wrote Black Men United's You Will Know, and worked with Questlove on Black Messiah. 2. Jackie Birch, casting director. Known for casting Die Hard, The Breakfast Club, and 16 Candles. She launched her casting career in the early 1980s with Psycho 2 and Smokey and the Bandit Part 3. She became director John Hughes's go-to casting director, shaping 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Weird Science. Her impressive portfolio also includes The Running Man, Coming to America, Three Amigos, and Dick Tracy. Miss Major Griffin Gracie, activist, fought for equality for over 50 years. She founded the House of Gigi to create safe spaces for Black trans communities facing transphobia, racism, sexism, poverty, and violence. Her activism dates back decades, advocating for people living with HIV/AIDS in New York and mentoring girls in prisons.
3. Mauro Di Francesco. Mauro Di Francesco, known affectionately as Mano, was a beloved figure of Italian comedy in the 1980s. He brought unforgettable charm and humor to cult classics like Acclaim, I ragazzi della Treci, and Vacanze di Natale. With his signature mix of irony and sincerity, he played the clumsy yet lovable Milanese guy trying to win over hearts, a role audiences came to adore. His unique style made him one of the most recognizable faces in Italian cinema of his time. Born in Milan in 1951, Mauro began acting as a child and quickly rose through theater, TV, and cabaret. He trained with Giorgio Strehler and worked alongside comedy legends like Diego Abatantuono and Massimo Boldi. His big screen breakout came in films like Sapore di Mare 2, Un anno dopo, Yesterday, Vacanze al Mare, and Ferragosto OK, eventually leading to his role in the Abbronzatissimi series. On set, he met actress Pascale Reynaud, and their story added another chapter to his life. In the late 1990s, Mauro chose a slower pace, focusing on his personal life while still keeping his humor and charisma alive. His final film appearance was in 2019's Un'estate a Venezia, created by his longtime friend Jerry Calla. Though his presence on screen became rare, his impact remained strong. Mauro's legacy lives on through the laughter and joy he gave to a generation. His story is one of talent, charm, and unforgettable moments in Italian entertainment.
4.
Marcy Free. Marcy Free, the iconic voice behind some of rock's most powerful anthems, has died at the age of 71. Known for her electrifying performances with bands like King Cobra, Signal, and Unruly Child, Marcy's voice defined a generation of melodic rock fans. Her longtime bandmate Jay Shellen confirmed the news on October 24th, calling her a marvel to behold and a voice with no limits. From the moment they formed Unruly Child in 1992, their friendship and music left a lasting impact on fans worldwide. Marcy's journey through music was nothing short of remarkable. In the 1980s, she fronted King Cobra and brought arena-level energy to every stage, no matter the size. Her work with Signal further showcased her vocal range, leading to a passionate fanbase that followed her across decades. With Unruly Child, she recorded 6 albums between 1992 and 2019, each release proving her voice remained as powerful and emotionally rich as ever. Tributes have poured in from fans and fellow musicians who admired Marcy not just for her talent, but for her authenticity and soul. She influenced countless singers, with one calling her one of my biggest vocal inspirations. Online, her performances are being revisited by fans who remember her raw emotion, precision, and stage presence. Her debut with Unruly Child and early work with King Cobra continue to stand the test of time. For those who followed her career, Marcy Free was more than a vocalist. She was a force of nature. Her music lives on, echoing in every chorus and every lyric she poured her heart into. A shining star of melodic rock, her legacy is written in every note she ever sang.
5.
In 1981, a duo from Leeds changed pop music forever. With Tainted Love, Soft Cell created a sound that defined the decade. Dark, emotional, and unforgettable. At the heart of it was Dave Ball, the quiet mastermind behind the synths. His work turned simple melodies into powerful soundscapes. Alongside Mark Allman's bold vocals, they became pioneers of synth pop. The song sold over 2.5 million copies and was followed by hits like Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, and Torch. Even as challenges came, Dave never stopped creating. Just days before his passing, Soft Cell completed a brand new album, Hacienda, set to release in 2026. Dave Ball's journey was filled with innovation. From early days in Blackpool to forming Soft Cell at Leeds Polytechnic, he helped shape a generation of music. Inspired by Kraftwerk, he brought moody electronic sounds to life. After Soft Cell's first run, he co-founded The Grid, creating another wave of music history. His bond with Allman was unique, a partnership that brought emotion and edge to every song. Even through health struggles, Dave stayed focused on music. His final recordings captured memories, dreams, and the sound of a lifetime. His legacy lives on in every note, every beat, and every heart still moved by his music.
6.
Brazilian bodybuilding champion Ricardo Nolasco dos Santos, known to fans as Cadu Santos, has died at the age of 31. The heartbreaking news was shared by his father on Instagram, calling it the saddest day of my life. Cadu wasn't just a champion. He was an 11-time title holder, a 2-time regional winner, and a respected figure in Brazil's fitness world. With over 13,000 followers, he inspired many through training tips and glimpses into his personal life. On July 19th, just months before his passing, Cadu proposed to his longtime girlfriend Sabrina on stage, in a moment filled with love and celebration. Their bond was visible in every photo they shared, from public milestones to quiet beach days. Sabrina described him as her strength, pride, and partner through life's highs and lows. In Cadu's final post, he paid tribute to his beloved cat, Becky, a heartfelt farewell that now carries even more emotional weight. Fans quickly filled the comments with messages of love and remembrance. Though Cadu's time was brief, his dedication, charisma, and passion for fitness left a powerful legacy. He will be remembered not just as a champion, but as someone who deeply touched the lives around him.
The face of Clint Eastwood is not merely a visage, it is a landscape. It is a topographic map of American cinema, weathered by time, etched with the history of a changing nation, and hardened by a stoicism that feels almost geological. To understand the man, one must look past the squinting eyes and the clenched jaw that became his trademark. One must go back before the poncho, before the magnum, and before the Oscars. One must return to the dust. Eastwood Jr. was born on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco, entering a world that was rapidly falling apart. The Great Depression was not just a backdrop for his childhood, it was the atmosphere he breathed. His father, Clint Sr., was a bond salesman who, like millions of others, found his profession evaporated by the economic collapse. The Eastwoods became nomads in their own country, drifting down the West Coast in search of work. From Sacramento to the Bay Area, they moved constantly. Clint was the perpetual new kid, a solitary figure in the back of the classroom, learning early on that silence was often a safer shield than words. This transient existence instilled in him a sense of rootlessness that would later define his on-screen persona. He was not of the establishment, he was of the road. As a young man, Eastwood was a physical specimen, over 6 feet tall, athletic, and devastatingly handsome. But he lacked direction. He drifted through manual labor jobs, digging swimming pools, baling hay, fighting fires, and working as a lumberjack. He was living the life of a blue-collar American drifter, absorbing the rhythms of the working class, a texture that would later lend an undeniable authenticity to his performances. He wasn't acting like a man who knew how to use a chainsaw or swing a hammer. He was that man. His trajectory shifted in 1950 when he was drafted into the US Army during the Korean War. Fate, however, had a different battlefield in mind. While hitching a ride on a Douglas AD bomber returning from Seattle to Fort Ord, the plane ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific Ocean near Point Reyes. Eastwood and the pilot were forced to swim 3 miles through frigid, shark-infested waters to reach the shore. It was a test of pure survival, a moment of primal endurance that Eastwood rarely spoke of in later years, but one that undeniably forged a steel core within him. He survived not by panicking, but by simply keeping his head above water, stroke by stroke, a metaphor for his early career in Hollywood. After his discharge, Eastwood landed in Los Angeles. He enrolled at Los Angeles City College, but the allure of the movies began to pull at him. He was spotted by a cameraman who was struck by his rugged good looks, leading to a contract with Universal Studios. But the studio system of the 1950s didn't know what to do with him. He was too tall, his Adam's apple stuck out too far, and he spoke too slowly. He was stiff. His first roles were uncredited and forgettable, often casting him as a lab technician or a background pilot. He was fired by Universal, told that his teeth needed fixing and that he squinted too much. The very traits that would later make him an icon were initially cited as the reasons for his failure. His lifeline appeared in 1959 with the television series Rawhide. Eastwood was cast as Rowdy Yates, the ramrod of a cattle drive. The show was a hit, and for 7 years, Eastwood was a household name. Yet, creatively, he was suffocating. Rowdy Yates was a white-hat hero, young, impetuous, and fundamentally decent. He was everything Eastwood found uninteresting. He longed to play characters with shadows, men with moral ambiguity. He tried to inject nuance into Rowdy, asking to say fewer lines, to let the camera do the work, but television producers of the era wanted dialogue, not subtlety. By the mid-60s, Eastwood was looking for an exit. He was 34 years old, an age where many leading men were already established, and he feared his career would die on the dusty sets of a TV western. Then came a script that nobody in Hollywood wanted. It was a low-budget Italian production titled The Magnificent Stranger, based on Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. Every major star had passed on it. James Coburn rejected it. Charles Bronson called the script bad. Eastwood, however, saw something. He saw a protagonist who didn't talk about his feelings, a mercenary who operated in a world of absolute moral decay. He agreed to take the role for $15,000 and a Mercedes-Benz, flying to a remote part of Spain to work with a relatively unknown director named Sergio Leone. What happened on that set in 1964 changed the course of cinema history. Leone and Eastwood, unable to speak each other's language, communicated through the universal language of film. Eastwood stripped the character down. He bought the black jeans and the hat himself in Santa Monica. He found the cigars, despite being a non-smoker, because he felt the character needed something to grit his teeth around, creating that perpetual scowl. He cut lines from the script, arguing that the audience should wonder what the character was thinking rather than be told. The result was a fistful of dollars. The character, eventually known as the Man with No Name, was a shock to the system. He wasn't John Wayne. He didn't fight for justice. He fought for gold. He was dirty, unshaven, and lethal. The violence was operatic, the tension stretched to a breaking point by Ennio Morricone's haunting score. Eastwood's performance was a masterclass in minimalism. He did more with a shift of his eyes than most actors did with a soliloquy. The film, followed by For a Few Dollars More and the epic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, became a global phenomenon. In Italy, he was a god. In America, critics were baffled. They called the films violent and nihilistic, dismissing Eastwood as a wooden actor in spaghetti westerns. They didn't realize they were witnessing the death of the Old West and the birth of the modern anti-hero. Eastwood had returned to America not as Rowdy Yates, the boyish cowboy, but as the coolest, deadliest man on the planet. The drift was over. The legend had begun. By 1967, Clint Eastwood had returned to the United States, but he was a stranger in his own land. In Europe, he was a cinematic deity, the silent avenger who had rewritten the rules of the Western. In Hollywood, he was still viewed with skepticism, a TV actor who had gotten lucky in foreign B-movies. The industry gatekeepers didn't understand that the cultural tectonic plates had shifted beneath their feet. The era of the polished, morally unambiguous hero was dying. The era of the anti-hero had arrived, and Eastwood was its avatar. He didn't wait for the studios to catch up. He forced them to. His first move was a declaration of independence. Frustrated by the financial waste and bureaucratic bloating he had witnessed throughout his early career, Eastwood established his own production company, Malpaso Productions. Named after a creek on his property in Carmel, Malpaso, literally translating to bad step, a sardonic nod to his agent's warning that starring in spaghetti westerns was a bad career move. The company became his fortress. Unlike other stars who created vanity labels, Eastwood used Malpaso to control every aspect of his work. He wanted efficiency. He wanted to shoot fast, under budget, and without studio interference. His first American lead in Hang 'em High, 1968, was a Malpaso co-production. It was a hit, proving that his European persona translated perfectly to the American West. However, the most significant partnership of this era, and perhaps of his entire career, was not with a studio, but with a director, Don Siegel. When they met to film Coogan's Bluff in 1968, they found they were kindred spirits. Siegel was a no-nonsense craftsman known for lean, punchy action films. He taught Eastwood the economy of filmmaking. Siegel didn't waste film. He knew exactly what he needed in the editing room before he even rolled the camera. Eastwood absorbed this philosophy like a sponge. This mentorship would culminate in 1971, a year that would define Eastwood's legacy forever. The year 1971 was a firestorm. It began with The Beguiled, a Southern Gothic psychological horror where Eastwood subverted his macho image by playing a wounded soldier victimized by women. It was a critical success, but a commercial disappointment. But later that year, Eastwood and Siegel unleashed Dirty Harry. The script for Dirty Harry had bounced around Hollywood for years. Frank Sinatra had been attached to it but broke his wrist. Paul Newman passed because he felt it was too right-wing. Eastwood saw the script differently. He saw it as a modern Western. Inspector Harry Callahan was not a cop in the traditional sense. He was a gunslinger dropped into the concrete canyons of San Francisco. The film tapped into a visceral vein of American anxiety. The country was reeling from the Zodiac killer murders, rising crime rates, and a sense that the justice system was failing the innocent. Harry Callahan was the fantasy solution to that reality. He didn't care about bureaucracy. He cared about results. The film's impact was nuclear. The scene where Eastwood stands over a wounded bank robber, aiming his Smith & Wesson Model 29, and growls, "You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky?" "Well, do you, punk?" became one of the most quoted lines in cinema history. But it wasn't just an action movie, it was a cultural battleground. Pauline Kael, the influential critic for The New Yorker, famously labeled the film a fascist work. Liberals decried it as police brutality propaganda. Conservatives embraced it as a return to law and order. Eastwood, ever the enigma, shrugged off the political labels. He argued the film was about a victim's rights, about a man doing a job that society was too polite to stomach. Whether loved or loathed, Dirty Harry made Eastwood the biggest box office star on the planet. Yet, Eastwood was already looking beyond stardom. He wanted the chair. He had been watching Leone and Siegel for years, studying lenses, lighting and pacing. In 1971, he approached the executives at Universal with a proposal to direct a thriller called Play Misty for Me. The studio was hesitant. Why would the world's biggest action star want to direct a small, claustrophobic film about a disc jockey being stalked by an obsessive fan? Eastwood offered to do it for no salary, taking a percentage of the profits instead. He brought the film in under budget and ahead of schedule. Play Misty for Me was a revelation. It showed that Eastwood understood suspense and character psychology. He wasn't just a tough guy, he was a filmmaker. Throughout the 1970s, Eastwood alternated between crowd pleasers and more personal projects, a one for them, one for me strategy. He reprised Harry Callahan in Magnum Force, 1973, and The Enforcer, 1976, films that softened the character's edges and addressed the criticisms of the original. But his directorial voice was growing louder. In 1976, he directed and starred in The Outlaw Josie Wales. The Outlaw Josie Wales is widely considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. It was a revisionist take on the genre. Josie Wales is a Confederate soldier who refuses to surrender, but the film is not about the Civil War. It is about the reconstruction of a soul. As Wales travels west, he accumulates a ragtag family of outcasts, an elderly Cherokee, a Navajo woman, a young distinct intellectual from the East. Eastwood directed the film with a lyrical, almost tender touch that surprised his detractors. Behind the scenes, however, it was a display of his ruthlessness. He had replaced the original director, Philip Kaufman, mid-production, a move that led the Directors Guild of America to institute the Eastwood Rule, which forbids an actor from firing a director and taking over the job themselves. It was a testament to his uncompromising vision. It was his movie, his risk, and he would ensure it was done his way. By the close of the decade, Eastwood starred in Escape from Alcatraz, 1979, his final collaboration with Don Siegel. It was a cold, precise procedural about the famous 1962 prison break. Eastwood played Frank Morris not as a hero, but as a cipher, intelligent, quiet, and determined. The film was a massive hit, capping off a decade where Eastwood had dominated the American box office. He had successfully transitioned from a spaghetti Western curiosity to the undisputed king of Hollywood. But as the 1980s approached, Eastwood was about to face a new challenge, aging in an industry obsessed with youth and finding new ways to deconstruct the very myths he had helped create. He was no longer just the man with no name. He was becoming the man who knew too much. As the 1980s dawned, the tectonic plates of American action cinema were shifting once again. A new breed of hero was rising from the gymnasiums. Muscular titans like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who dealt in excess, explosions, and cartoonish invincibility. Clint Eastwood, now entering his 50s, stood in stark contrast to this neon-soaked era. He was lean, lined, and analog in a digital world. The question circling Hollywood was no longer if Eastwood was a star, but whether he was relevant. Eastwood's answer was to turn inward, deconstructing the very myths he had built his empire upon. He began the decade with Bronco Billy, 1980, a film that remains one of his personal favorites. It was a gentle, self-deprecating comedy where he played a shoe salesman from New Jersey who reinvents himself as a cowboy showman. It was a meta-commentary on his own career, a man pretending to be a Western hero because the world needed one, even if the bullets were blanks and the tent was patched. It showed a vulnerability that audiences weren't entirely ready for, but it signaled that Eastwood was tired of simply being the tough guy. He followed this with Honky Tonk Man, 1982, a melancholic road movie set in the Great Depression. Playing a dying country singer alongside his real-life son Kyle, Eastwood explored themes of failure and alcoholism. The film was a critical success in France, but ignored in America. The box office wanted the magnum, not the guitar. Eastwood obliged, but on his own terms. In 1983, he directed and starred in Sudden Impact, the fourth Dirty Harry film. It was darker, pulpier, and more violent than its predecessors. It also birthed the catchphrase that would define the Reagan era, "Go ahead, make my day." The line was delivered with such venomous disdain that it transcended cinema, becoming a political rallying cry. Sudden Impact was the highest-grossing film in the series, proving that the public's appetite for Eastwood's brand of justice was insatiable. Yet beneath the commercial triumph, there was a sense of repetition. The critics were sharpening their knives, dismissing him as a relic repeating old tricks. In a move that baffled the tabloids, Eastwood took a detour into local politics. In 1986, frustrated by the bureaucratic zoning laws of Carmel by the Sea, specifically a ban on selling ice cream cones that affected a building he owned, he ran for mayor. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a mission of civic repair. He campaigned door to door, won by a landslide, and spent 2 years attending town council meetings, fixing sewer lines, and preserving the town's library. He took a salary of $200 a month. It was the ultimate manifestation of his screen persona. The stranger rides into town, cleans up the mess, and restores order. But it also grounded him. While Hollywood was snorting cocaine and making high-concept blockbusters, Eastwood was discussing water permits. Returning to film, Eastwood took his biggest artistic gamble yet with Bird, 1988. A lifelong jazz aficionado, he directed a biopic of saxophonist Charlie Parker. He didn't star in it. He stayed behind the camera, crafting a dark, rain-slicked, impressionistic portrait of genius and addiction. Forrest Whitaker gave a career-defining performance, and the film won awards at Cannes. Eastwood was beginning to be taken seriously by the intelligentsia as an auteur, a filmmaker with a distinct vision of American darkness. However, the late 80s and early 90s were a commercially perilous time. Films like The Dead Pool, 1988, Pink Cadillac, 1989, and The Rookie, 1990, were critical and commercial misfires. They felt tired, formulaic, and out of touch. The action hero Eastwood looked weary. Industry whispers suggested that the legend was finally fading, destined to end his career in mediocre cop comedies. Eastwood, however, had an ace up his sleeve. He had held the rights to a script by David Webb Peoples, titled The Cut Whore Killings, since 1976. He had sat on it for nearly 2 decades, waiting until he was old enough to embody the lead character properly. He renamed it Unforgiven. Released in 1992, Unforgiven was not just a movie, it was a eulogy for the Western genre. Eastwood played William Money, a former outlaw and cold-blooded killer who had been cured by a good woman and was now struggling to raise 2 children on a failing pig farm. The film stripped away the romance of the West. There were no quick-draw duels in the sun. The violence was messy, painful, and terrifying. When money kills a man, the man doesn't die instantly. He screams for water, he cries, he bleeds out slowly in the dirt. The climax of Unforgiven is perhaps the greatest sequence in Eastwood's career. Money, fueled by whiskey and grief, walks into a saloon during a rainstorm to confront the corrupt Sheriff Little Bill Daggett, Gene Hackman. He is a ghost of his former self, a demon rising from the mud. The shootout is chaotic and brutal. When Little Bill lies dying, he gasps, "I don't deserve this. To die like this. I was building a house." Money looks down, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and delivers the line that serves as the epitaph for every cowboy Eastwood ever played. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. Unforgiven was a revelation. It connected the dots of Eastwood's entire career, acknowledging the violence he had glorified and revealing the hollow soul beneath it. It was dedicated to Sergio and Don, Leone and Siegel, his cinematic fathers. The 65th Academy Awards in 1993 were Eastwood's coronation. For decades, the Academy had ignored him, viewing him as a lowbrow genre actor. That night, Unforgiven won Best Picture, and Clint Eastwood won Best Director. Standing on the podium holding the gold statue, the 62-year-old icon looked out at the industry that had once told him to fix his teeth. He had not only survived, he had conquered. He had turned the Western inside out and created high art from the dust. The make-my-day actor was gone. The master filmmaker had arrived. After the triumph of Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood could have easily ridden into the sunset. He had the gold statue, he had the respect, he had nothing left to prove, but retirement is a concept foreign to Eastwood's constitution. Instead of slowing down, he shifted gears, entering a period of prolific experimentation that would see him dismantle the last remnants of his tough guy caricature to reveal the beating heart beneath. If the previous decade was about deconstructing the myth of the gunfighter, this era was about exploring the vulnerability of the man. His first move post-Oscars was strictly as an actor in Wolfgang Petersen's In the Line of Fire, 1993. It was a brilliant piece of casting. Eastwood played Frank Horrigan, an aging Secret Service agent haunted by his failure to save JFK. For the first time, Eastwood used his age not as a rugged texture, but as a plot point. He was winded when he ran. He had the flu. He was physically outmatched by the younger villain, played by John Malkovich. It was a massive box office hit, proving that audiences were willing to embrace an Eastwood who was human, fallible, and fighting against the dying of the light. Then came the pivot that shocked the industry. In 1995, Eastwood directed and starred in The Bridges of Madison County, an adaptation of the runaway bestseller by Robert James Waller. The book was dismissed by critics as sentimental drivel, and the idea of Dirty Harry playing a sensitive National Geographic photographer romancing a lonely Iowa housewife seemed like a punchline. But Eastwood saw the story's quiet desperation. He cast Meryl Streep as Francesca Johnson, and what emerged was a film of profound delicacy. Eastwood stripped away the book's purple prose, focusing on the silences, the glances, and the palpable heat between two people finding love too late. The scene where he stands in the rain, looking at Streep in her husband's truck, a moment of agonizing, silent choice, remains one of the most powerful romantic sequences in 90s cinema. Critics who had spent decades mocking his acting were forced to admit that Eastwood could hold the screen with the greatest actress of her generation and match her beat for emotional beat. Throughout the late 90s, Eastwood worked with the efficiency of a factory foreman, but the soul of an artist. He directed the atmospheric Southern Gothic Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, 1997, and the crime thriller True Crime, 1999. While these films met with mixed success, they served as a laboratory. He was perfecting his method, few takes, deep shadows, and a lean and mean production style. He was becoming a master of chiaroscuro, lighting his scenes with a darkness that mirrored the moral ambiguity of his characters. He also indulged in a victory lap with Space Cowboys 2000, a commercially successful blockbuster that allowed him and fellow veterans Tommy Lee Jones, Donald Sutherland, and James Garner to wink at their own obsolescence while still saving the day. But the true renaissance began in 2003. Eastwood turned his lens toward Dennis Lehane's novel, Mystic River. He didn't appear in the film. He stayed behind the camera, orchestrating a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions set in the working-class neighborhoods of Boston. The film is a suffocating operatic examination of trauma, abuse, and the way the past claws at the present. Eastwood guided Sean Penn and Tim Robbins to Academy Award-winning performances, creating an ensemble piece that felt incredibly lived in. There was no Eastwood heroism here, only pain and the jagged edges of grief. Mystic River was a critical smash, nominated for Best Picture, and it signaled that Eastwood had entered a new phase. He was now the elder statesman of American tragedy. He followed this immediately with a knockout punch. In 2004, he read a short story collection by F.X. Toole called Rope Burns. He was drawn to a story about an old cut man and a hillbilly female boxer. Studios rejected the pitch for Million Dollar Baby. They said boxing movies didn't sell, and certainly not ones with female leads that ended on such a depressing note. Eastwood, trusting his gut as always, financed part of it himself and shot it in typically brisk fashion, 37 days. Million Dollar Baby is a film about boxing in the same way Moby Dick is a book about fishing. It is a story about a surrogate father and daughter finding redemption in a brutal world. Eastwood played Frankie Dunn, a gym owner who attends Mass daily but finds no solace in God. Hilary Swank played Maggie Fitzgerald, the waitress who wants to be a fighter. Their chemistry was electric, filled with gruff affection and unspoken love. But it was the film's third act that stunned the world. The narrative takes a devastating turn, shifting from a sports movie to a harrowing ethical debate on euthanasia and mercy. The final scenes, bathed in shadow, featuring Eastwood's tear-streaked face as he makes the impossible choice to set his Mo Quishel, my darling, my blood, free, left audiences sitting in stunned silence. At the 77th Academy Awards in 2005, the narrative was complete. At age 74, Clint Eastwood won Best Picture and Best Director for Million Dollar Baby. He became the oldest winner of the directing prize in history. Standing on stage, he looked not like a man at the end of his career, but a master craftsman at the height of his powers. He had made a film that was simple, direct, and devastatingly emotional, proving that the man who once traded in bullets was now the most effective dealer in tears. The man with no name had become the man who understood the human heart better than almost anyone in Hollywood. He had climbed the mountain twice, but remarkably, he was already looking for the next peak. By 2006, Clint Eastwood was 76 years old. In Hollywood years, this is usually the era of Lifetime Achievement Awards and gentle fade-outs. But Eastwood was operating on a different biological and creative clock. Having conquered the Western, the thriller, and the sports drama, he turned his gaze toward the defining event of the 20th century, World War II. But typically, he refused to take the easy route. He didn't just want to make a war movie, he wanted to conduct a cinematic experiment that had never been attempted in the history of film. He decided to tell the story of the Battle of Iwo Jima from two opposing perspectives, releasing two separate films back-to-back. The first was Flags of Our Fathers, 2006. Based on the book by James Bradley, it deconstructed the famous photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. Eastwood used the film to explore the machinery of propaganda, how the government used images of heroism to sell war bonds, and how the heroes themselves were often traumatized pawns in a larger political game. It was a technical marvel, desaturated and gritty, but it was cold, intellectual, and somewhat distant. It was the thesis statement. The emotional gut punch came months later with letters from Iwo Jima, 2006. Filmed almost entirely in Japanese, a language Eastwood does not speak, the film looked at the battle through the eyes of the doomed Japanese defenders. It remains arguably Eastwood's most humanist work. By humanizing the enemy, showing them writing letters home to their wives and children while waiting for inevitable death in the sulfur tunnels, Eastwood erased the line between good guys and bad guys. War, in Eastwood's lens, was simply a tragedy of geography. Letters was a masterpiece of empathy. It won the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film and secured Eastwood yet another Best Director nomination. He had proven that an American cowboy icon could tell a sensitive, heartbreaking story from the perspective of America's former wartime adversary. Eastwood continued his prolific streak with Changeling, 2008, a period drama starring Angelina Jolie, and Invictus, 2009. A look at Nelson Mandela's use of the Rugby World Cup to unite post-apartheid South Africa. But the cultural lightning strike of this era came in a form that looked familiar, a 1972 Ford Gran Torino and a scowl. Gran Torino 2008 was marketed as a return to form. Dirty Harry is back and he's retired, but the film was a Trojan horse. Eastwood played Walt Kowalski, a Korean War veteran and retired auto worker living in a decaying Detroit neighborhood. Walt is a relic, racist, bitter, and estranged from his family. He sits on his porch drinking beer, clutching an M1 Garand, and growling at the Hmong immigrants who have moved in next door. If Unforgiven was the funeral for the Western, Gran Torino was the funeral for the urban vigilante. At first, the audience cheers as Walt pulls a gun on gang members, delivering lines like, "Get off my lawn." It feels like classic Eastwood retribution. But as the film progresses, Walt undergoes a transformation. He is befriended by the neighboring teenagers, Thao and Sue, and realizes he has more in common with these immigrants than with his own spoiled children. The film becomes a story about mentorship and atonement. The ending of Gran Torino is one of the most significant moments in Eastwood's filmography. When Walt confronts the gang to save Thao, he doesn't shoot them. He reaches into his jacket, mimicking the draw of a gun, but pulls out a lighter. The gang guns him down. He dies unarmed, his body falling into a cruciform position. It was a deliberate subversion of the Dirty Harry mythos. The man who solved problems with a .44 Magnum now solved them with martyrdom. Eastwood famously grumbled through a song over the end credits, his voice like gravel in a mixer. The film was a massive hit, grossing nearly $270 million worldwide, proving that Eastwood was still the only star who could open a drama to blockbuster numbers. He wasn't done. After a mixed run with the biopic J. Edgar, 2011, and the musical adaptation Jersey Boys, 2014, Eastwood picked up the autobiography of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. Steven Spielberg had initially been attached to direct American Sniper, but when he dropped out, Warner Brothers turned to their most reliable hand. Eastwood was 84 years old. He shot the film quickly, as always, trusting Bradley Cooper to carry the emotional weight of the lethal sniper. American Sniper 2014 became a cultural Rorschach test, much like Dirty Harry 4 decades earlier. Released in the heat of political polarization, the film was embraced by conservatives as a patriotic tribute to a soldier and criticized by liberals for simplifying the Iraq War and ignoring historical context. Eastwood, as usual, claimed he was just telling a story about a man and his job, but the filmmaking was visceral. The scenes of Kyle on the rooftops, the sound design of the breathing, the white-knuckle tension, it was pure cinema. The film exploded. It became the highest-grossing film of 2014 in the US, beating out The Hunger Games and Marvel movies. It grossed over $547 million worldwide. At an age when most people are in assisted living, Clint Eastwood had directed the biggest hit of his entire career. He had tapped into the American zeitgeist once again, finding the raw nerve of the nation's post-9/11 psyche. The success of American Sniper cemented Eastwood's status as a singularity. He was a director who could command massive budgets, a star who could still draw crowds, and an artist who refused to bend to modern sensibilities. He was working with a crew he had known for decades, shooting on the first take, finishing early, and coming in under budget. He was a machine. But as he moved toward his 90s, Eastwood began to focus on a new theme: the unsung, ordinary heroes who are chewed up by the very systems they try to serve. The final chapter of his career would be dedicated to real men facing the machinery of bureaucracy and the judgment of the media. In the final chapter of his career, Clint Eastwood became the chronicler of the ordinary American hero under siege. Following the massive success of American Sniper, he moved away from soldiers and gunfighters to focus on regular men who did extraordinary things, only to find themselves dismantled by the very institutions they saved. It was a thematic trilogy of competence versus bureaucracy, a subject that seemed to irritate and fascinate the aging libertarian in equal measure. He began with Sully, 2016. Starring Tom Hanks as Captain Chesley "Sully" Sullenberger, the film focused on the miracle on the Hudson. But typical of Eastwood, the crash was not the point. The crash was merely the inciting incident. The real drama lay in the aftermath, where insurance adjusters and computer simulations tried to prove that the human pilot had erred. It was a meta-narrative for Eastwood's own career, the battle of human intuition and experience against the cold, calculated algorithms of the modern world. When Sullenberger argues that the simulations failed to account for the human factor, he was speaking for Eastwood himself, a director who rejected digital storyboards and focus groups in favor of gut instinct. He pushed his obsession with realism to its absolute limit with the 1517 to Paris 2018. Telling the story of the three Americans who thwarted a terrorist attack on a Thalys train, Eastwood made the audacious decision to cast the real men, Anthony Sadler, Alex Skarlatos, and Spencer Stone, to play themselves. It was a risky, experimental move for a major studio film. While critics found the acting wooden, the attempt itself showed a director who, at 87, was still willing to break the rules of cinema just to see what would happen. He followed this with Richard Jewell, 2019, a harrowing, empathetic portrait of the security guard falsely accused of the 1996 Olympic Park bombing. It was a furious film, attacking the media and the FBI with the same ferocity that Dirty Harry had attacked the justice system, yet anchored by a tender mother-son dynamic that broke hearts. But the audience missed seeing the man himself. They wanted one last ride with the icon. Eastwood delivered it with The Mule, 2018. At 88 years old, he stepped back in front of the camera to play Earl Stone, a horticulturist who becomes a drug mule for a Mexican cartel. It was his best performance in decades. Earl was frail, hunched, and regretful, a man who had prioritized work over family for his entire life. When Earl sings along to Don't Let the Old Man In by Toby Keith while driving his truck, it feels like a glimpse into Eastwood's soul. The line, "I bought everything but time," resonated as a confession from a man who had spent 60 years on movie sets. The Mule was a surprise smash hit, grossing over $174 million. It proved a singular fact. Clint Eastwood was the only octogenarian in history who could open a major motion picture on his name alone. Then came the whisper of a farewell. Cry Macho, 2021. Released when Eastwood was 91, it was a film of startling fragility. He played Mike Milo, a washed-up rodeo star tasked with retrieving a boy from Mexico. The film moved at the pace of a slow drift. There were no big shootouts. When Eastwood throws a punch, he looks like he might shatter, but that was the point. He was deconstructing his own masculinity one last time, allowing the audience to see the bones beneath the legend. He sleeps in a shrine to the Virgin Mary. He dances slowly with a widow in a dusty cantina. It was a movie about finding peace in the twilight, a gentle, almost silent elegy to the cowboy archetype. Even then, he refused to stop. In 2024, he released Juror Number 2, a courtroom thriller that examined the weight of guilt and the imperfections of justice. Approaching his mid-90s, Eastwood was still on set, still saying action, or rather, his preferred soft-spoken, okay, go ahead, and still bringing films in under budget. To assess the legacy of Clint Eastwood is to assess the history of American cinema itself. He's the bridge between the golden age and the modern era. He was a contract player when the studio system ruled. He was a TV star when television was young. He was a counterculture icon in the 60s, the king of the box office in the 70s and 80s, an Oscar-winning auteur in the 90s and 2000s, and a box office anomaly in the 2010s. He has directed over 40 films and starred in countless others. His style is defined by a jazz-like improvisation and a blue-collar work ethic. He does not believe in auteur theory or intellectualizing his art. He shoots the rehearsal. He rarely does more than 2 takes. He finishes at 4 p.m. so the crew can go home to their families. He trusts the audience to understand the story without being spoon-fed. In an industry defined by vanity and neuroticism, Eastwood has stood as a pillar of pragmatic sanity. But beyond the logistics, there is the face, that lined, weathered topography that we have watched age for 7 decades. We saw the smooth-skinned cattle driver, the sunburned mercenary, the angry cop, the aging gunfighter, and finally, the fragile old man. He taught generations of men how to walk, how to stare, and eventually how to grieve. There is a famous story about Eastwood playing golf with country singer Toby Keith. When Keith asked him how he remained so active and creative at his age, Eastwood replied simply, "I just don't let the old man in." He never did. The old man, the symbol of decay, of retirement, of irrelevance, was always kept outside the door. Inside, Clint Eastwood remained the artist, the storyteller, the drifter. As the sun finally sets on this monumental life, one image remains: a tall, lanky silhouette standing against a widescreen horizon, casting a shadow that stretches longer than any other in the history of Hollywood. The credits may eventually roll, but the legend of Clint Eastwood will never truly fade to black. It is etched in the silver nitrate of history, permanent and unforgiving.